A day and a half since Donald Trump Jr. first made public his email exchange with a music publicist, promising information from the Russian government which could hurt the Clinton campaign. Donald Trump is maintaining its business as usual, tweeting, "The White House is functioning perfectly, focused on health care, tax cuts / reform, and many other things. My son Donald did a good job last night. He was open, transparent, and innocent. This is the great witch hunt in political history. Sad." But beyond the walls of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, we're getting a different story. A Trump family ally described the situation to the Washington Post as, quote, a Category 5 hurricane. The White House is paralyzed, the top Republican told CNN. But you know, there are actually two parties in Washington, and the Democrats are kicking into attack mode.
What I found really revealing even about the Trump organization's own self-serving explanations is they admit being disappointed in what they got at the meeting. They were hoping for more goods.
If that is not definition of collusion, I don't know what is. I'm sure that it is.
With a Russia investigation ongoing and a new Senate health care bill due out tomorrow, the Democrats steering the right course. Joining me is a former Democratic candidate for president. He also happened to have been governor of Massachusetts, Michael Dukakis. Governor, it's great to see you. Thanks so much for being here. So days before the November election, you said of Trump, he's a pathological liar and a head case. Anything change your opinion in these 8 months?
It's worse than I thought it would be.
How so?
Well, you know, he's a New Yorker.
Yeah, and?
And I figured, okay, so he says he's a Republican, but on social issues, on the environment, and a lot of these things, I expected him to be a New Yorker. And it's far worse than that. I mean, this administration is really about as bad as anything I've ever seen. And I'm not just talking about the guy's personality. I'm talking about lobbyists moving into the administration and taking over regulatory agencies. I mean, this is terrible.
Larry Summers said in the piece in the Washington Post the other day that Trump is, his conduct alone is the single greatest threat to national security. You with Summers on that?
I don't know what to tell you about his conduct when it comes to national security. It's troubling, to be sure, and a little scary to have this guy in charge. But on the domestic side, it's so much worse than I thought it would be in terms of domestic. I mean, the health care thing. What is he talking about? Told us he was going to provide health insurance for everybody, right?
And not cut Medicaid. He pledged
and not cut
more
Medicaid,
than one
and make it possible for all of us to enjoy low-cost health insurance. I mean, this is a disaster.
Possibly has no idea what's going on in terms of these proposals. He's trusting people maybe he shouldn't, or is this coming from the core of Donald Trump?
Well, I don't think he knows a lot about health care. I mean, he said that.
It's more complicated than he thought it was.
Well, it is complicated, but you know, there's a fundamental truth here. I mean, are you going to try to provide decent, affordable health care for all Americans? If you go out and take a poll tomorrow, and you say to the American people, working Americans and their families, who, by the way, are overwhelmingly the uninsured, you know, it's not people on welfare, they get Medicaid. Mm-hmm. These are working Americans. Working Americans have decent, affordable health care. 95% of the American people say yes. And it doesn't have to be that complicated, but given what we've got here, and given the fact that we've got an additional 20, 25 million people who are now getting health insurance who weren't prior to Obamacare, this is serious stuff. And I think a lot of conservative Republicans representing rural states, states with small towns, are beginning to understand that Obamacare has been an enormously helpful
or at least the repeal of it would be a nightmare, particularly in rural communities.
Yeah.
How about this Donald Trump Jr. thing, this string of emails? Is there a smoking gun in there? What's your take on this thing?
Well, I've tended to poo-poo this Russian thing.
Poo-poo? Why?
Because, let's face it, they're hacking us, we're hacking them. We're tapping the phone of the Russian ambassador. You know, we've got God knows how many American agents in Moscow, even as they have them.
But wait a second. The son of the president, the son-in-law, and the campaign manager go to a meeting where the son knows?
Hold on.
Okay.
And so I've kind of taken this with a bit of a grain of salt, you know. But yesterday was very troubling, because if they didn't understand that meeting with what in effect was a representative of the Russian government, who at least they were told was prepared to give them the dirt on Hillary, and if they didn't understand that that was a very serious thing, then there's something fundamentally wrong with them.
I want to talk about your own party for a second. You saw Adam Schiff up there a minute ago and Debbie Wasserman Schultz.
Native of Framingham, Massachusetts.
Is that true?
Adam?
I didn't know that.
He's
done pretty well for himself.
I think he went to California when he was 2, but he was born in Framingham, Massachusetts.
Who would know it but you? But also a guy who ran for vice president in the most recent election. Here's what he had to say yesterday, Tim Kaine.
The investigation, it's not, nothing is proven yet, but we're now beyond obstruction of justice in terms of what's being investigated. This is moving into perjury, false statements, and even into potentially treason.
And in addition to Tim Kaine, and he's not the only one, by the way, Seth Moulton has used the T word, talked about treason. A congressman from L.A. today filed articles of impeachment. Is this the route that Democrats should be taking? Impeachment, treason, perjury? Are they the ones who should be advancing this? Is this the right deal for them?
I don't think it is. I think the route we ought to be taking is to start organizing now on a 50-state basis and sweep the Congress next year.
With what message? Anti-Trump or pro-something?
Well, some of it has got to be anti-Trump. I mean, are we going to continue with this stuff or not? But much more positive message has got to be, hey, look, we're talking about decent, affordable health care for all Americans. They don't believe in that. We're talking about good schools. They don't believe in that. We're talking about something called climate change, which is no joke these days. So it's got to be a strong, positive message in that sense, but it's got to be a 50-state campaign. We've got to get out of this red-blue narrative, and we've got to get out there. You've heard this from me too many times already, and it's got to be at the grassroots, at the precinct level. And that's where this fight has got to be waged.
You know, you are Mr. Amtrak, Mr. High-Speed Rail, and I love it, I should say. Is one area where you and the President of the United States at least talk the same game is on infrastructure investment? So do you have hope that there's some there on the Trump front or no?
It's all baloney.
Meaning what?
It's kind of gimmicky stuff. You're going to give tax breaks to private sector people to get them to build infrastructure. You're going to have toll highways owned by private entities and all this kind of stuff. I mean, that's foolishness. Look, this is an essential investment in this country's future. And it ought to be a public investment. It ought to be serious. It ought to be quite large in terms of what's needed out there. I think the current defense budget, Jim, is obscenely overspending our money.
Meaning theoretically there's money there that could be transferred to investing in this infrastructure.
We're going to build a stealth bomber, 100 of them, for $300 billion. Will somebody tell me against whom this stealth bomber is going to be? It's got nothing to do with ISIS. I don't think ISIS is worried about a stealth bomber. Do you?
I don't know enough to know, but I trust your opinion. But can we get, speaking of infrastructure, can we come back locally? I think people know who've been paying attention. Your prized project is this north-south rail link.
Right.
Bill Weld has joined forces with you. Seth Moulton, that we mentioned a minute ago, is a big.
Very much so.
Charlie Baker approved a $1.5 million feasibility study. Secretary of Transportation, who used to work for you, I should say, Secretary Pollack has said good things. But, Governor, the sense I get from having spoken to the governor about it, reading what he has to say, this is more a courtesy to two former governors, you and Weld, than it is an open-mindedness about the project. He seems to be invested in something called the Michael S. Dukakis South Station Transportation Center and expanding that rather than north-south rail. Am I wrong?
Well, first, my transportation center is now covered by beer ads, this historic structure that we restored. So when you start talking about South Station, there's a personal concern here. I mean, good God, why are we doing that? In any event, I think the governor's kind of cooling on South Station expansion because it doesn't make any sense. Spending $2 billion for 7 new tracks at South Station is, in the words of Congressman Moulton, truly insane. The question is, how do we fully integrate the system, and how do we invest, Jim, beyond just the north-south rail link in a first-rate rail passenger system for Massachusetts?
Can you explain what, if we had a north-south rail link, what would happen? People would be able to go from where to where without having to get off and then...
they would be traveling all over eastern Massachusetts, and for that matter, the northeastern part of the United States, with uninterrupted service and a fully integrated system. But it's more than that. Southeastern Massachusetts needs rail transportation. Western Massachusetts, as Senator Eric Lesser keeps saying, needs first-rate rail transportation, and we need a comprehensive rail plan for Massachusetts. We know what it
and this country, but you know, have you read Graham Allison's book yet?
I haven't.
He was here when I was off the other night. I read a significant chunk of it. Just listen to this one thing about high-speed rail. In the last decade, China has built 12,000 miles of high-speed rail. Over the same decade, California, this predates Trump, by the way, have been trying to build 520 miles unsuccessfully. They now say it'll be done, 520 miles in 2029. What's wrong with this country? I mean,
we're spending gazillions on defense and little or nothing on desperately needed domestic infrastructure.
Isn't it in part because the Democrats are scared of the T-word taxes as Republicans are? Isn't that part of the problem?
Well, if you're going to invest in infrastructure, you can't be afraid of the T-word. On the other hand, we're spending, what, $700 billion in the military these days? More than the next 7 countries combined, including Russia and China. What is this? 837 American bases, Jim, in 150 countries, 30 years after the Cold War. I mean, this doesn't make any sense.
One step at a time. North-South Rail Link, your first town hall meeting is in Salem on the 31st of this month.
31st, and
7 o'clock.
Thank you for mentioning that, 7 o'clock. We invite folks from the North Shore who have an enormous interest in getting into town on the North-South Rail Link to do so.